Gavel strikes shattered the heavy silence of courtroom 4B, each sharp crack echoing like a gunshot against the mahogany panels. Sweat beaded on the forehead of Officer Vance Whitaker, pooling in the deep wrinkles of a man who suddenly realized his badge was no longer a shield. Across the room, a 17-year-old boy sat quietly, his posture perfect, his eyes holding a quiet dignity that starkly contrasted with the trembling hands of the veteran cop on the stand. Whitaker had spent 20 years bullying the streets, convinced he was the untouchable law, but today, under the blinding fluorescent lights of justice, the hunter was the hunted. He was about to learn that the absolute worst person to unlawfully terrorize in the dead of night is the only son of the city's newly appointed United States Attorney. Dust motes danced in the shafts of morning light filtering through the tall, arched windows of the county courthouse, but the atmosphere inside was anything but serene. Defense Attorney Alexander Sinclair, a man whose reputation for dismantling corrupt officers was whispered about in precinct locker rooms across the state, adjusted his glasses. He stood at the podium, staring a hole through Officer Vance Whitaker. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in the witness box. He was a broad-shouldered man, his uniform pressed to military precision, his jaw set in a stubborn, defiant line. For 2 decades, that uniform had given him carte blanche in the suburban borders of Oakridge. He was accustomed to deference. He was accustomed to fear. He was entirely unaccustomed to the icy, surgical scrutiny of a lawyer like Sinclair. "Officer Whitaker?" Sinclair began, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly across the gallery. "Let us revisit that evening. You testified during direct examination that you initiated a traffic stop on my client, Darius Washington, due to a suspected broken taillight and an erratic lane change. Is that correct?" "That is correct," Whitaker grunted, leaning into the microphone. "The vehicle matched the description of a suspect vehicle in recent burglaries, and the driver was operating it in a suspicious manner." Sinclair picked up a sleek black tablet from his desk and tapped the screen. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit C into evidence. The maintenance logs and timestamps from the computerized diagnostics of the Mercedes-Benz sedan my client was driving that evening." Judge Evelyn Harrington, a stern, silver-haired woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Sinclair." "Officer Whitaker," Sinclair said, pacing slowly toward the center of the room, "are you aware that the vehicle in question is equipped with an automated diagnostic system that registers even a flickering bulb in real time? And are you aware that the logs from that evening show absolutely zero faults in the lighting system? Furthermore, the onboard lane assist telemetry indicates the car never wavered from the center of its lane for the entire stretch you followed him." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Technology glitches. I saw what I saw. As a sworn officer of the law, my visual assessment gave me reasonable suspicion to initiate a stop." "Reasonable suspicion," Sinclair repeated, rolling the words around as if tasting something bitter. "Or was your suspicion based entirely on the fact that you saw a young black teenager behind the wheel of a luxury vehicle in an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood?" "Objection." The prosecutor, a young assistant district attorney named Lena Jenkins, who looked increasingly nauseous as the trial progressed, stood up. "Calls for a conclusion, Your Honor," badgering the witness. "Overruled," Judge Harrington snapped. "The witness's mind and motivations are the crux of this civil rights violation charge. You may answer the question, officer." Whitaker gripped the wooden rail of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. "I do not see color, Mr. Sinclair. I see behavior." The driver looked nervous. He was gripping the steering wheel tight, avoiding eye contact in the rear-view mirror. He was a 17-year-old boy being tailed by a police cruiser in the dark. Sinclair countered sharply. "I would be nervous. Anyone in this courtroom would be nervous. But let us move past the initiation of the stop. Let us discuss what happened when you actually approached the vehicle. Darius Washington sat at the defense table, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He wore a crisp navy blue suit. He was an honor roll student, a varsity track captain, and a boy who had never so much as received a detention in his life. That evening had shattered his understanding of the world, replacing his youthful optimism with a terrifying, visceral understanding of his own vulnerability. When you approached the driver's side window, Sinclair continued, you stated in your police report that the suspect was non-compliant and verbally aggressive. You stated he reached for his waistband, necessitating you to draw your service weapon. Do you stand by that official report, sworn under penalty of perjury? Whitaker swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the prosecutor's table, then back to Sinclair. He knew where this was going. He had tried to get the footage suppressed. The police union lawyers had fought tooth and nail for months, claiming the dash cam and body cam had malfunctioned. But Sinclair had subpoenaed the cloud backup from the manufacturer, bypassing the precinct's internal servers entirely. I stand by my report, Whitaker said, though his voice lacked its previous booming confidence. In the heat of the moment, officer safety is paramount. The subject made a sudden movement. A sudden movement? Sinclair echoed. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense calls for the playback of Exhibit F, the unedited, synchronized body camera and dash camera footage from that evening. Judge Harrington nodded. Bailiff, dim the lights, let's see what really happened. As the lights in courtroom 4B lowered, a heavy, suffocating dread settled over Vance Whitaker. He looked out into the gallery. The front row was packed with reporters, civil rights advocates, and community leaders. But sitting directly behind the defense table was a man who commanded the room simply by existing in it. Victor Washington, Darius's father. Victor wore a tailored charcoal suit, his broad shoulders and unreadable expression giving him the aura of a sleeping lion. He did not blink as he stared at Whitaker. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a cold, calculating promise of absolute ruin. Whitaker averted his gaze, his stomach twisting into a painful knot as the large monitors in the courtroom flickered to life. The screens illuminated the courtroom with the stark, jerky view of Officer Whitaker's body camera. The audio hissed to life, capturing the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of Whitaker's boots on the asphalt as he approached the sleek black Mercedes. On the screen, Darius had already rolled down all 4 windows of the vehicle, a safety protocol his father had drilled into him since he got his learner's permit. His interior dome light was on. Both of his hands were placed flat and visibly on the top of the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. License, registration, and proof of insurance, the digitized voice of Whitaker barked from the speakers. The tone was immediately hostile, dripping with a venom that made several jurors physically recoil in their seats. Good evening, officer. Young Darius's voice came through, shaking slightly but remarkably polite. My wallet is in my right back pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. How would you like me to proceed? It was a textbook response. It was exactly what young black men were taught to say to survive a traffic stop. But on the footage, Whitaker did not de-escalate. He leaned in close, his flashlight blinding the camera's view for a fraction of a second as he shone it directly into Darius's eyes. Don't get smart with me, boy, Whitaker snarled on the tape. I didn't ask for a speech. I said, give me your damn license. I'm trying to, sir. I just want to make sure you know I'm reaching into my pocket so you don't think I have a weapon. Step out of the car, Whitaker ordered suddenly, stepping back and dropping his hand to the grip of his sidearm. Step out of the vehicle right now. In the courtroom, Sinclair paused the video. Officer Whitaker, Sinclair said, the silence in the room amplifying his voice. The subject clearly communicated his intentions. His hands were visible. He called you sir. What part of that interaction constituted verbal aggression? Whitaker wiped his brow with a thick, trembling hand. His tone, it was defiant. You can't capture a street-level threat on a camera, Mr. Sinclair. It's an instinct. You feel it. You felt threatened by a teenager asking permission to retrieve his wallet? Sinclair pressed, taking a step closer to the stand. I don't know what he had in that pocket, Whitaker snapped, his temper flaring. I don't know whose car that really was. You see a kid like that in a car like that, 9 times out of 10, it's stolen. I was doing my job. A kid like that, Sinclair repeated softly. He turned slowly to the jury, letting the phrase hang in the air like a toxic cloud. A kid like that. We all know exactly what you mean, Officer Whitaker. Let's resume the video. The video played. Darius slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, keeping his left hand on the wheel. He opened the door and stepped out into the crisp night air. He was tall but thin, clearly a high schooler. He wore a college prep academy track jacket. Turn around. Hands on the roof of the car. Spread 'em, Whitaker ordered. Darius complied instantly. Officer, please. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just driving home from a study session. Without warning, the footage violently jerked. Whitaker grabbed Darius by the back of his jacket and slammed him face first onto the roof of the Mercedes. A sickening thud echoed through the courtroom speakers. In the gallery, a woman gasped. Victor Washington's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering rapidly in his cheek, but he remained perfectly still. Stop resisting, Whitaker yelled on the video, his knee digging into the back of Darius's legs, forcing the boy to the ground. I'm not resisting. I'm not moving, please. Darius cried out, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. Whitaker ripped Darius's arms behind his back, ratcheting heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists with enough force to cut into the skin. He then yanked the teenager upward by the chain of the cuffs, prompting a scream of pain from the boy. You think you're untouchable because you're driving Daddy's fancy car, Whitaker taunted on the tape, shoving Darius toward the cruiser. Let's see how tough you are down at the precinct, punk. Sinclair stopped the video again. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Even the prosecutor, Jenkins, was staring at the table, refusing to look at her own witness. Officer, Sinclair said, his voice dangerously quiet. Where in that footage did Darius Washington reach for his waistband? Whitaker opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at the jury. Several of them were glaring at him with open disgust. Where did he resist, Officer Whitaker? Sinclair demanded, his voice rising to a booming crescendo that rattled the windows. Where is the sudden movement that justified you slamming a compliant, terrified child onto the hood of a car and tearing his shoulder out of its socket? The camera angle. It doesn't show everything, Whitaker stammered, his face flushing a deep mottled red. He tensed up. Tensing up is active resistance under the department matrix. He tensed up because a 220-pound man was crushing his spine, Sinclair fired back. You didn't arrest Darius Washington because he committed a crime, Officer Whitaker. You arrested him to teach him a lesson. You looked at him, you looked at his car, and you decided he didn't belong in your pristine neighborhood. So you manufactured a charge of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, hauled him into your cruiser, and took him to the precinct. Sinclair walked back to the defense table and placed his hands flat on the polished wood. But you see, Officer Whitaker, your fatal mistake wasn't just the assault. Your fatal mistake was what you did when you got him to the station. Your fatal mistake was deciding to play God with the wrong family. Let us move the timeline forward, Sinclair said, adjusting his tie. His eyes locked on the sweating officer. You have transported Darius to the precinct holding area. You have confiscated his phone, his wallet, and his jacket. You have denied him his repeated request to make a phone call to his parents, in direct violation of state law for a minor. He was being processed, Whitaker argued weakly. Standard operating procedure dictates. We are well past standard operating procedure, officer, Sinclair interrupted. You placed him in the bullpen, an open holding cell, and then you sat at your desk less than 10 feet away. What did you say to him? I don't recall, Whitaker mumbled. You don't recall? Sinclair picked up a transcript from his desk. Fortunately, The precinct's internal security cameras have excellent audio capabilities. Shall I read it? Or shall we play the tape again? Whitaker swallowed heavily. Play it if you want. It was just locker room talk, cop talk. Cop talk, Sinclair scoffed. He gestured to the AV technician. The screen shifted from the dark street to the harsh, sterile lighting of the precinct squad room. Whitaker was seen leaning back in his chair, his boots resting on his desk, sipping a cup of coffee. Behind bars, Darius sat hunched on a metal bench, cradling his injured shoulder, tears streaming silently down his face. Crying's not going to help you now, tough guy. Whitaker's voice echoed in the courtroom, lazy and cruel. You act like a thug on the street. You get treated like one. I don't care who your daddy is or what kind of car he bought you. In my town, you respect the badge. You're going to sit in that cage all night, and in the morning, the judge is going to slap a felony resisting charge on you. Kiss your college scholarships goodbye. I have a right to a phone call, Darius whispered on the tape, shivering. Please. My parents don't know where I am. Your parents should have taught you how to behave, Whitaker shot back, laughing to a nearby officer who was off screen. Probably too busy buying him shiny things to actually raise him. Typical. In the courtroom, Whitaker closed his eyes. Hearing his own words played back in the dead silence of a federal civil rights trial made him sound exactly like what he was, a petty, racist tyrant. You were very confident, Officer Whitaker, Sinclair noted. You felt entirely in control of the situation. You held this young man's future in your hands, and you were squeezing just for the thrill of it. But then the front doors of the precinct opened. Sinclair turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, to understand what happened next, you must understand a bit of local context. The Oakridge Police Department had operated as a sort of boys' club for decades, but just days earlier, the President of the United States had confirmed a new United States Attorney for the district, a man tasked specifically with cleaning up police corruption and civil rights abuses in this exact county. A man whose face hadn't yet made it to the bulletin boards of the precinct. Sinclair turned back to Whitaker. Officer, describe the man who walked into the precinct. Whitaker looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He glanced at Victor Washington in the gallery, then quickly looked away. He was a tall man, black, wearing a suit. He was wearing a tuxedo, actually, wasn't he? Sinclair corrected. He had come straight from a charity gala where he had been the guest of honor. He walked up to the front desk. What did he say? He asked for the desk sergeant. And when the desk sergeant told him to take a number and sit down, what did he do? He ignored him, Whitaker whispered. He walked straight through the swinging doors into the restricted squad room. Let's watch, Sinclair commanded. The security footage on the screens showed the moment. The heavy wooden doors to the squad room swung open. Victor Washington strode in. Even on the grainy security feed, the man's presence was overwhelming. He did not rush. He did not shout. He walked with the measured, terrifying calm of an apex predator stepping into its territory. On the tape, Whitaker stood up from his desk, dropping his boots to the floor, instantly furious at the intrusion. Hey, you can't be back here, Whitaker yelled on the video, his hand moving toward his pepper spray. Get your ass back in the lobby before I throw you in a cell with him. Victor Washington did not even look at Whitaker. His eyes immediately found Darius in the holding cell. The relief that washed over the teenager's face was palpable even through the screen. Dad? Darius sobbed, standing up. Victor stopped in the center of the room. He looked at Darius's torn jacket. He looked at the awkward way his son was holding his shoulder. He looked at the bruises forming on his wrists. Then, and only then, did Victor Washington turn his head to look at Officer Vance Whitaker. What did he say to you, officer? Sinclair asked in the courtroom. His voice was practically a whisper, yet commanding total attention. Whitaker gripped the microphone. His voice cracked. He asked for my name and badge number. And how did you respond? Whitaker closed his eyes. The memory burned like acid. On the video, Whitaker stepped up to Victor, puffing out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate the man. "I'm Officer Whitaker, badge 402. Whitaker sneered on the tape. "And you're about to be under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a police investigation." "You the kid's father? Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Put your hands behind your back." Whitaker reached for Victor's arm. What happened next on the tape happened so fast it made the courtroom gasp. Victor did not strike the officer. He did not raise his voice. He simply stepped inside Whitaker's reach, his posture perfectly rigid, and reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. Whitaker recoiled, reaching for his weapon and shouting a warning, but Victor was not drawing a weapon. He pulled out a small gold-embossed leather wallet and flipped it open, pressing it flat against Whitaker's chest. "My name is Victor Washington," the deep, booming voice of the father commanded on the tape, echoing through the stunned squad room. "I am the United States Attorney for this district. I am the chief federal law enforcement officer in this state. You have unlawfully detained a minor, denied him his Miranda rights, assaulted him under color of law, and falsified a police report. If you do not have those cell doors open in the next 5 seconds, badge 402, I will have the FBI swarm this building and arrest every single officer in this room for criminal conspiracy to violate civil rights." In the courtroom, Sinclair let the tape play out. The video showed Whitaker freezing completely. The color drained from his face as he stared at the federal credentials pressed against his chest. The swagger, the arrogance, the racist cruelty, it all evaporated in a millisecond, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a bully realizing he had just picked a fight with a titan. "Officer Whitaker," Sinclair said softly into the silence of the courtroom, "did you open the cell?" Whitaker stared down at his trembling hands. "Yes." "And did you attempt to apologize to Mr. Washington?" "Yes." "And did he accept your apology?" Whitaker looked up, his eyes meeting Victor Washington's in the gallery. Victor's face was a mask of cold granite. "No," Whitaker whispered. "He told me to save it for the judge." Sinclair nodded slowly. He turned back to his podium, organizing his notes. "Well, Officer Whitaker, here we are. The judge is listening." Courtroom 4B remained completely motionless as Sinclair let the weight of Whitaker's admission hang in the sterile, conditioned air. The silence was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating pressure that seemed to press down squarely on the shoulders of the veteran police officer. Vance Whitaker looked distinctly older than he had when the trial commenced days earlier. His previously immaculate uniform felt loose, his posture crumbling under the sheer gravity of his unraveling career. Sinclair walked deliberately back to the plaintiff's table, briefly placing a reassuring hand on young Darius Washington's shoulder. Darius offered a small, strained nod. The teenager's right arm was still immobilized in a dark sling beneath his suit jacket, a physical testament to the brutality he had endured. "Officer Whitaker," Sinclair resumed, his tone shifting from thunderous indignation to a surgical, icy calm. "We have established the unlawful nature of your traffic stop. We have established your use of excessive, unjustified force, and we have established that you recognized your catastrophic error the precise moment Victor Washington presented his federal credentials. Let us now examine your actions in the hours immediately following Mr. Washington's departure from the precinct." Whitaker shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward Lena Jenkins, the union-appointed defense attorney sitting at the adjacent table. Jenkins offered him nothing. Her face was a mask of professional detachment, calculating the inevitable damage. After Mr. Washington took his injured son to the emergency room, where attending physicians diagnosed Darius with a torn rotator cuff and severe contusions. "What did you do, officer?" Sinclair asked. I returned to my patrol duties," Whitaker lied, his voice barely a rasp. "The shift wasn't over." "You returned to your patrol duties," Sinclair repeated flatly. "Your Honor, I would like to direct the jury's attention to Plaintiff's Exhibit J." This is a printed log of the electronic keycard access for the precinct's basement server room. Judge Harrington peered over her reading glasses. Admitted. Proceed. Sinclair handed a copy of the document to the bailiff, who passed it to the witness stand. Officer Whitaker, would you please read the timestamp associated with badge 402, your personal identification number? On the morning of the following day, Whitaker stared at the paper as if it were coated in poison. His hands trembled so violently that the paper rustled against the microphone. It says 3:14 in the morning. 3:14 in the morning, Sinclair stated, turning to face the jury. Approximately 90 minutes after Victor Washington walked out of your squad room with his traumatized son. What business did a patrol officer have entering the restricted, climate-controlled server room where the precinct's internal surveillance and body camera footage are stored? I was instructed to go down there, Whitaker stammered, his eyes wide and panicked. Captain Fletcher asked me to check the router. The dispatch radios were experiencing latency issues. Captain Fletcher, Sinclair noted. Interesting, because we deposed Captain Gregory Fletcher last month under oath. In his sworn testimony, he explicitly stated he was asleep at his home at that hour and had issued no such order. In fact, he testified that you are expressly forbidden from entering the server room without IT authorization. Sinclair did not give Whitaker a chance to fabricate another excuse. He signaled the AV technician. Let's look at Exhibit K. This is a screen capture of the server terminal interface from that exact time. The large monitors in the courtroom flickered, displaying a stark black and white interface filled with lines of code. Highlighted in bright yellow was a specific command sequence. Officer Whitaker, do you recognize the command prompt? DLFSQC, surveillance, holding cell cam, 4 ****. Sinclair read the string of text with devastating precision. For the benefit of the jury, this is a forced deletion command. Someone manually attempted to scrub the local hard drives of all footage from the holding cell recorded that evening. You were attempting to erase the evidence of your racist taunts, weren't you? That's circumstantial, Whitaker burst out, his voice cracking with desperation. Anyone could have used my terminal. The keyboards are accessible. Anyone in a locked room that requires your specific biometric keycard to enter? Sinclair countered smoothly. Officer, you panicked. You realized you had just falsely arrested and physically assaulted the son of the United States Attorney. You called your union representative at that hour. Telephone records show a lengthy conversation. Immediately following that call, you marched down to the server room and attempted to wipe the digital slate clean. Whitaker's chest heaved. He looked at the jury. 12 pairs of eyes stared back at him with a mixture of pity and absolute contempt. But you are a patrol officer, Mr. Whitaker, not a software engineer, Sinclair continued, twisting the knife. You deleted the local files. What you failed to realize is that the precinct had upgraded its cloud storage protocol recently. The system automatically mirrors all holding cell footage to an off-site encrypted server hosted by the state. A server that the FBI Cyber Division, acting on a preservation order signed by a federal judge that very morning, secured before you even finished your shift. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The sheer speed and power of the counterstrike were breathtaking. Whitaker had thought he was covering his tracks, entirely unaware that a federal net had already been cast over his entire precinct while he was still sitting at his desk. You did not just violate my client's civil rights, officer, Sinclair said, leaning over the podium. You committed felony, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and spoliation. You tried to bury the truth because you knew exactly how ugly it was. Whitaker slumped back in his chair. The aggressive, domineering cop who had terrorized the streets of Oakridge was completely gone, replaced by a broken man realizing the true extent of his peril. He had played a rigged game for 20 years, but he had finally encountered a player who owned the board. Let us move past your attempts to destroy evidence, Sinclair said, his voice relentlessly driving the narrative forward. Let us talk about the culture that empowered you to believe you could get away with it. You have hidden behind the concept of officer safety and standard operating procedure throughout this trial. You have heavily relied on the assumption that your fellow officers would back your version of events. Sinclair paced slowly toward the center of the courtroom, his polished shoes tapping a rhythmic cadence on the hardwood floor. The blue wall of silence. It is a formidable barrier. It has protected corrupt officers for generations. But walls, Officer Whitaker, tend to crumble when struck by a wrecking ball. Sinclair picked up a thick-bound transcript from his desk. Your partner that evening was a rookie officer named Bryce Langford. He had been on the force for a few months. He was in the passenger seat of your cruiser when you first spotted Darius Washington's vehicle. Whitaker's head snapped up. A flash of genuine fear crossed his eyes. He had assumed Langford was taken care of. The union had assured him that the rookie would fall in line, that he would claim his body camera battery had died, and that he could not recall the specifics of the conversation in the cruiser. Officer Langford is not in the courtroom today, Sinclair announced to the jury. He is currently under federal protection, but prior to entering that protection, he sat down with federal investigators and provided a sworn deposition in exchange for immunity regarding your cover-up. Jenkins, the union lawyer, finally stood up, though she looked thoroughly defeated. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. We have not had the opportunity to cross-examine Officer Langford on these new statements. Your Honor, Sinclair countered effortlessly, this deposition was entered into discovery with opposing counsel notified. It is a statement against interest and directly contradicts the defendant's sworn police report. Furthermore, we have the audio to back it up. Judge Harrington banged her gavel. Overruled. The defense was provided the materials. I will allow the audio, Mr. Sinclair. Proceed. Sinclair turned to the AV technician and nodded. Exhibit M, please. The interior dashcam audio from the patrol cruiser timestamped minutes before the traffic stop. The courtroom speakers crackled. The sound of a heavy engine humming filled the room, accompanied by the faint, tinny sound of a sports radio broadcast playing in the background of the police cruiser. Then, Whitaker's unmistakable, gravelly voice cut through the static. Look at this piece of work, Whitaker's voice sneered on the audio. The Mercedes? Rookie Officer Langford's younger, higher-pitched voice asked nervously. He's doing the speed limit, Tom. Registration tags look current. Yeah, right, Whitaker scoffed. Look who's driving it. Kid looks like he barely has a permit, cruising through Oakridge at midnight in a luxury Benz. You think he bought that bagging groceries? Could be his parents' car, Langford suggested hesitantly. Or he jacked it from the heights, Whitaker shot back. I'm tired of these punks coming into our zone thinking they own the place. Let's light him up. For what? Langford asked. We need probable cause. Whitaker let out a dark, ugly chuckle on the recording. Watch and learn, rookie. Tail lights flickering, erratic lane change. I smell weed. Take your pick. I'm going to pull this entitled little thug over and put the fear of God in him. Give him a reminder of where he belongs. The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. The final flimsy pillar of Whitaker's defense, the claim of a legitimate fear-based traffic stop, had just been pulverized into dust. There was no misunderstanding. There was no split-second decision. It was premeditated malice, fueled by blatant, undeniable racial prejudice. In the gallery, a few people shook their heads in disgust. Darius Washington stared down at his hands, his jaw clenched tight. Beside him in the front row, his father, Victor Washington, remained terrifyingly still, his dark eyes boring into the man who had casually plotted to terrorize his son for sport. A reminder of where he belongs, Sinclair repeated, letting the ugly words echo off the mahogany walls. He walked right up to the witness stand, leaning in close to Whitaker. Tell me, officer, where exactly does an honor student, a varsity athlete, and a law-abiding citizen belong in your town? Whitaker opened his mouth, but his vocal cords seized. He looked at the jury box. One of the jurors, an older white man who had previously looked somewhat sympathetic to the police uniform, was now glaring at Whitaker with undisguised revulsion. Whitaker was completely, utterly isolated. "Your own partner turned you in, Whitaker," Sinclair said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that carried over the microphone. "Captain Fletcher disavowed your actions. The police union has quietly withdrawn its funding for your legal defense as of this morning. You are sitting on that stand alone. You built a career on intimidation, but the moment you were exposed to the light, your brotherhood scattered like roaches." Sinclair stepped back, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You thought you were a predator hunting prey in the dark, but you were just a bully who finally picked on the wrong child. And now the very justice system you perverted for 2 decades is coming down on your head with the force of an avalanche." Sinclair turned his back on the trembling, sweating officer and walked toward the judge. "Your Honor," Sinclair said, his voice echoing with absolute finality, "I have no further questions for this witness. The prosecution rests its case." Judge Harrington peered over her reading glasses, her expression devoid of any sympathy. "Ms. Jenkins, does the defense wish to redirect or call any further witnesses to the stand?" Jenkins stood slowly, her posture stiff. She had a duty to her client, but she also had a career to protect. Defending a man caught on tape executing a racially motivated assault and a subsequent digital cover-up was career suicide in front of a federal judge. "Your Honor," Jenkins began, her voice tight, "the defense calls former Deputy Chief Harlan Brooks to the stand as a character witness." A low murmur rolled through the gallery. Harlan Brooks was a retired, old-school law enforcement executive who had mentored Whitaker early in his career. He swaggered up to the stand, his chest puffed out, wearing a sharp gray suit that could not quite hide the belligerence in his posture. He took the oath and settled into the chair, glaring defiantly at Sinclair. Under Jenkins' brief and highly scripted direct examination, Brooks painted a picture of Whitaker as a dedicated public servant. He used buzzwords like proactive policing, high-stress environment, and unblemished record. He described Whitaker as a cop's cop, a man who held the line against the encroaching chaos of the streets. "Thank you, Chief Brooks," Jenkins said, hastily retreating to her desk. "Your witness, Mr. Sinclair." Sinclair did not even bother to bring his notepad to the podium. He simply stood up and buttoned his suit jacket, his eyes locked on the retired officer. "Chief Brooks," Sinclair said, his voice deceptively mild. "You described Officer Whitaker as having an unblemished record. By that, do you mean his official, public-facing personnel file?" "I mean his record, Counselor," Brooks grunted. "The man has commendations. He gets the job done." "He certainly gets a specific type of job done," Sinclair countered. "Are you familiar with the name Mateo Ramirez?" Brooks's swagger visibly faltered. A micro-expression of panic flashed across his wrinkled face before he forced it back into a scowl. "I review hundreds of cases. I can't be expected to remember every single name." Sinclair walked over to the plaintiff's table and picked up a manila folder sealed with red evidence tape. He broke the seal with a sharp snap that echoed in the quiet room. "Let me refresh your memory. Years ago, a 19-year-old Hispanic college student named Mateo Ramirez was pulled over by Officer Whitaker for a rolling stop. During the encounter, Mr. Ramirez suffered a fractured orbital bone, 3 broken ribs, and a severe concussion. Officer Whitaker claimed the young man tensed up and resisted. "If that's what the report said, then that's what happened," Brooks stated stubbornly. The charges against Mr. Ramirez were quietly dropped, and a civil settlement was paid out by the city to the Ramirez family, bound by a strict non-disclosure agreement. An agreement that you, Deputy Chief Brooks, personally signed off on. Jenkins jumped up. "Objection. Prior bad acts, Your Honor. Prejudicial. Goes directly to the witness's claim of an unblemished record." "Your Honor," Sinclair fired back smoothly, "the defense opened the door to character." "Overruled," Judge Harrington stated firmly. Well, the witness will answer. City settles lawsuits all the time, Brooks sneered, though sweat had begun to gather at his hairline. It's cheaper than going to trial. Doesn't mean the officer did anything wrong. Cheaper, Sinclair repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. Let's talk about another name. Let's talk about a young man named Tyrell Vance. Years ago, another traffic stop, another shattered jaw, another taxpayer-funded settlement that you buried in the Internal Affairs archives, categorizing the excessive force complaint as unsubstantiated, despite photographic evidence. Sinclair slammed the folder down onto the podium. You did not mentor a dedicated public servant, Mr. Brooks. You enabled a predator. You built a system that actively protected violent, racially biased officers, hiding their brutality behind taxpayer money and administrative loopholes. You protected him so he could continue holding the line in Oakridge, a line drawn explicitly to keep young men like Darius Washington out of your pristine neighborhoods. Isn't that the truth? You don't know the first thing about what it takes to police those streets, Brooks roared, losing his temper completely. We keep civil society intact. No, Chief Brooks, Sinclair said softly, shaking his head. You broke it. And today the bill comes due. No further questions. Brooks practically fled the witness stand. Jenkins slumped in her chair, rubbing her temples. She did not even bother to stand when Judge Harrington asked if the defense rested. She just nodded from her seat. We rest, Your Honor. The closing arguments that afternoon were a study in contrasts. Lena Jenkins spoke for a short time. She tried to string together a narrative about the difficult, high-stakes nature of police work, pleading with the jury not to let hindsight bias ruin a man's life over a misunderstanding and a flawed, split-second decision. It was a hollow, robotic speech delivered by a lawyer who knew her words were landing on deaf ears. Then Alexander Sinclair approached the jury box. He did not yell. He did not pound his fists. He spoke with a quiet, devastating sorrow that commanded the absolute attention of every soul in the room. When we give a man a badge and a gun, Sinclair began, making eye contact with each juror individually, we are handing him the most sacred trust a society can bestow. We are giving him the power to strip away a citizen's liberty, and sometimes their life. In exchange for that immense power, we demand one simple thing: that the law be applied equally, fairly, and without prejudice. Sinclair pointed directly at Whitaker. Vance Whitaker took that sacred trust and turned it into a weapon of terror. He did not pull Darius Washington over because he suspected a crime. He pulled him over because he looked at a successful young black man driving a nice car and felt deeply, personally offended by his very existence in that zip code. He assaulted him, not out of fear, but out of malice, out of a desperate need to enforce a racist hierarchy that exists only in his own mind. Sinclair walked over to Darius, who sat stoically, his injured arm cradled against his chest. Darius Washington did everything right. He was polite. He was compliant. He kept his hands visible. He followed the unwritten survival guide that every minority parent in this country is forced to teach their children. And it still was not enough to protect him from a man who had already decided he was a criminal before he even unbuckled his seatbelt. Sinclair turned his gaze to the back of the courtroom, where Victor Washington sat. Officer Whitaker thought he was accountable to no one. He thought he could act with impunity, secure in the knowledge that his department would cover his tracks. He was so incredibly arrogant that he openly taunted his victim in a holding cell. But arrogance is a blinding disease. Whitaker did not realize that the boy he was torturing was the son of the United States Attorney. He did not realize that his victim's father possessed the power to shatter his corrupt little kingdom into a million pieces. Sinclair walked back to the center of the floor, his voice rising to a powerful crescendo. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me make one thing absolutely clear. Darius Washington should not have needed a powerful father to survive that evening. Justice should not be a privilege reserved for the sons of federal prosecutors. Justice must be a fundamental right for every single citizen, regardless of who their parents are, how much money they have, or the color of their skin. By convicting Vance Whitaker today, you are not just punishing one corrupt cop. You are sending a message that will echo through every precinct in this state. You are declaring that the era of untouchable bullies is over. Find him guilty. Thank you. The silence in the courtroom after Sinclair sat down was profound. Judge Harrington read the jury their final instructions, and the bailiff escorted the 12 men and women into the deliberation room. The wait had begun. Deliberations usually took days in complex civil rights trials. The jury in the trial of United States versus Vance Whitaker took less than 3 hours. When the buzzer sounded, signaling that a verdict had been reached, a chaotic energy seized the courthouse corridors. Reporters scrambled for their seats. The heavy oak doors swung shut and a tense, suffocating quiet descended once more as the jurors filed back into the box. Nobody made eye contact with the defense table. Whitaker stood up, his massive frame trembling uncontrollably. Beside him, Jenkins looked resigned, her hands resting flat on her legal pad. Across the aisle, Darius Washington stood tall, his father Victor standing right behind him, a reassuring hand resting gently on the boy's uninjured shoulder. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Harrington asked, her voice cutting through the heavy air. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, replied. He handed a folded slip of paper to the bailiff, who walked it over to the judge. Judge Harrington read the paper, her expression completely unreadable. She handed it back to the clerk. "Publish the verdict." The clerk stood clearing his throat. In the United States District Court, on the first count of the indictment, deprivation of rights, under color of law, we find the defendant, Vance Whitaker, guilty. On the second count, assault and battery under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. On the third count, false imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty. On the fourth count, felony obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence, we find the defendant guilty. A collective exhale rushed through the gallery. In the front row, Victor Washington simply closed his eyes and nodded once. Beside him, Darius let out a shaky breath, a single tear cutting a path down his cheek. He had faced down his monster, and the monster had lost. "The jury is thanked and dismissed," Judge Harrington announced over the rising hum of the courtroom. She then turned her piercing gaze upon the disgraced officer. "Mr. Whitaker, step forward." Whitaker practically dragged his feet as he moved to the center podium, Jenkins standing reluctantly by his side. The arrogance that had defined his entire adult life had been entirely stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. "Vance Whitaker," Judge Harrington began, her voice echoing with righteous authority. "In my years on the federal bench, I have rarely seen a case of such blatant, premeditated cruelty. You used the badge that this state issued to you as a license to terrorize a child. You targeted him purely out of racial animus. You physically assaulted him, mocked his pain, and then, like a coward, you attempted to destroy the evidence in the dead of night to save your own skin." Whitaker was weeping now, openly sobbing, the sound pathetic and wet in the quiet room. "You have disgraced the uniform you wore," the judge continued relentlessly. "You have betrayed the public trust, and you have cast a dark shadow over the thousands of honorable men and women in law enforcement who actually uphold the oath you spat upon. Your attorney has requested bail pending sentencing and appeal. That request is summarily denied." Whitaker gasped, his head snapping up. "No. Please, Your Honor, my family." "You did not care about Darius Washington's family when you threw him in a cage," Judge Harrington shot back. slamming her gavel down to cut off his pleading. "You are a convicted felon, and you are a danger to the community you swore to protect. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals." Furthermore, Judge Harrington added, her voice dropping to a terrifying register, "given the federal sentencing guidelines for your combined convictions, including the severe enhancements for civil rights violations and obstruction, you are looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Court is adjourned." The crack of the gavel was deafening. The marshals descended upon Whitaker. They did not use the polite, gentle touch reserved for white-collar criminals. They grabbed his arms with the firm, unyielding grip of the law. They wrenched his hands behind his back. The sharp, ratcheting click, click, click of the steel handcuffs echoing through the room was the exact same sound Whitaker had forced Darius to endure on the hood of the Mercedes. As they marched Whitaker toward the side exit, the disgraced cop looked desperately over his shoulder toward the gallery. He was looking for his wife, who had stopped attending the trial days earlier. He was looking for his union buddies, who had completely abandoned him. Instead, his eyes met Victor Washington's. Victor did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply looked at Whitaker with the cold, sterile satisfaction of a man who had successfully removed a disease from his city. The United States Attorney gave Whitaker a slow, deliberate nod, a silent promise that this was only the beginning, and it was. The fall of Vance Whitaker was merely the first domino. Within days of the verdict, Victor Washington's office unleashed a massive, sweeping federal investigation into the Oakridge Police Department. Armed with the precedent of the Whitaker conviction and the cooperating testimony of rookie Bryce Langford, the FBI raided the precinct's internal affairs archives. They unearthed decades of buried complaints, excessive force reports, and racially biased arrest statistics. Captain Fletcher was forced into early retirement under the threat of federal indictment for failure to supervise and complicity in the cover-up culture. Retired Deputy Chief Harlan Brooks was stripped of his municipal pension after a civil suit exposed his role in the cover-ups. The entire Oakridge PD was placed under a strict federal consent decree, forcing mandatory body cameras that could not be manually turned off, civilian oversight boards, and a total restructuring of their training protocols. The blue wall of silence in Oakridge did not just crumble. Victor Washington took a bulldozer to it and salted the earth where it stood. As for Vance Whitaker, reality hit him the moment the heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary slammed shut behind him. He quickly learned that the prison ecosystem held a special, violently unique disdain for corrupt, racist cops. Stripped of his badge, his gun, his authority, and his friends, he spent his days in protective custody, jumping at every shadow, living out the remainder of his life in the exact same state of visceral, suffocating terror he had inflicted upon so many others. Darius Washington, however, refused to let the trauma define him. He underwent months of painful physical therapy to repair his shoulder, eventually returning to the track and team to finish his senior year. But the experience fundamentally altered his trajectory. That evening, he was thrown onto the hood of his car. He realized that innocence was not a shield. He realized that the law in the wrong hands was a weapon. In the years that followed, Darius graduated magna cum laude from a prestigious university. He did not pursue a career in corporate finance, as he had originally planned. Instead, he stood in the grand auditorium of a top-tier law school, proudly wearing his first-year student orientation badge. He knew the system was broken, but he also knew, having watched his father and Alexander Sinclair dismantle a monster, that the system could be weaponized for good. Darius Washington was going to become a civil rights attorney. He was going to spend the rest of his life making absolutely certain that the bullies of the world never, ever slept soundly again. True justice is rarely swift, and it is almost never easy. The conviction of Vance Whitaker stands as a stark reminder that authority without accountability is merely tyranny dressed in a uniform. When those sworn to protect the public weaponize their power against the marginalized, the damage inflicted goes far beyond physical scars. It fractures the very foundation of societal trust. Yet this story also illuminates the profound power of standing tall against systemic abuse. The courage of a young man holding on to his dignity, paired with the relentless, unyielding pursuit of truth by those who understand the law's true purpose, can dismantle even the most entrenched corruption. Karma, in the end, is not just a cosmic balancing of scales. It is the inevitable, crushing weight of reality finally catching up to those who believe themselves untouchable. True power does not lie in the badge you wear, but in the integrity with which you wield it. In this story, the most heartbreaking truth is that Darius did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. He was polite, careful, hands visible, voice respectful, yet one officer's ego and bias turned a normal drive into a nightmare. The lesson that cuts deepest is this: you can't control how people judge you, but you can control how you protect yourself and how you respond after the damage. Officer Whitaker believed his badge made him untouchable. He lied on paper, bullied a teenager, and even tried to erase the evidence when he realized he'd targeted the wrong family. But what destroyed him wasn't loud revenge. It was truth, documented and replayed in the light. Cameras, logs, audio, a timeline. When lies are spoken in darkness, they feel powerful. When they are played back in court, they become a confession. And Darius's dignity, quiet, steady, unbroken, became the mirror that exposed Whitaker for what he really was. Here's the life lesson for all of us. Don't let trauma make you smaller. Let it make you sharper. Pain can turn into poison, or it can turn into purpose. Darius could have spent his life angry at the world, and no one would blame him. Instead, he chose something stronger. He decided to learn the system so he could protect others who don't have a powerful father, a brilliant attorney, or a lucky break. That's what courage looks like in real life. Not pretending you weren't hurt, but refusing to let the hurt be the end of your story. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced unfair treatment, judgment, or abuse of power, and how did it change you? Share your experience in the comments. And if you want more emotional stories with real, valuable life lessons, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.